My name is Philip Messent. I'm the current editor of the Journal of Family Therapy, and I'm going to be, as part of the association's contribution to Mental Health Awareness Week, I've got great pleasure today in introducing you to Arlene Vetere, who I'm going to be talking to. Arlene is a clinical psychologist, a systemic family and couple therapist, a systemic supervisor, and she and Jan Cooper have established a family violence intervention service in Reading in 1996, and they've been carrying out work in this area and writing and teaching about it since. Jan has retired from therapeutic practice recently, but she continues to teach and write with Arlene. So, Arlene, what I was hoping we could talk about with you today is the kinds of stresses and strains that are likely to be placed on relationships during this time of lockdown, and how these can best be both understood and minimized. Anything from your work that you feel is going to be relevant to this crisis that we're in?
Oh, well, that's a lovely question, and it's a big one.
It is.
But I suppose what I'd want to say first of all, that some people are clearly thriving in these circumstances. You know, they're being tested in ways they probably could never have anticipated. Some families are homeschooling their children and trying to work from home. Some families have been made redundant. Family members have been made redundant. You know, they're not on furlough and so on. But nonetheless, a lot of people are rising to the challenge, and I hear through my own networks doing okay and doing as best they can. But what we want to think about today, though, is where we might get tripped up, where the unexpected catches us out, or some of the more predictable stresses and strains. Because in what I've just mentioned, homeschooling, for example, if you're not used to seeing yourself as a teacher, as a parent, and you're trying to juggle other responsibilities, and you're working with other worries at the same time, all of us could experience moments or longer periods of time where we feel overwhelmed.
Indeed.
I think one of the difficulties with feeling overwhelmed is, you know, to what extent your past experience has supported you in developing the kinds of strategies and approaches that help you manage when you're at risk of getting overwhelmed or when you are overwhelmed. And in the work that I do, and thinking about prior to this emergency that we're all in, I was always working with people in terms of what were the predictable and the unpredictable, if you like, triggers for unhelpful arousal. And in the work I do around stress and anxiety and violent behavior, the triggers tend to be twofold. They're either internal to the relationship, there's something happening in the relationship which triggers our physiological responses, our emotional responses unhelpfully, and there are external stresses, you know, like financial worries and problems at work and problems with our relatives and so on. So in terms of what we might predict, it's likely that most people are going to have more on their plate, if I could use that, than they would normally, and they're more likely to be tired. People who work from home and work online are all reporting that it takes a different kind of concentration and it's more tiring. People are finding their sleep disrupted, I'm hearing as well, because they're exhausted, and children are getting bored. And if children are getting bored and a bit fractious, you know, sometimes they'll settle, sometimes they won't. But it means the parent or the carer is trying to stay focused maybe on working from home at certain times of the day, whereas the child is not able to maintain their end of the concentration and so on. There are developmental differences and so on. So I think a lot of it's predictable. and a lot of it is unpredictable. And I think what I notice the most, Philip, is that in the therapeutic work I'm doing online and in the supervision work I'm doing, that probably everybody is underestimating the impact of the uncertainty on their well-being and in their relationships. So it's not that people aren't aware, they are, but because it is so overwhelming, one of the ways we cope is to kind of almost pretend it's not happening. Sort of like we have this idea that we get on with things, but the impact of such uncertainty in a wider world context, and we're all worried about the economy, we're all worried about health, we're all worried about what's happening to the planet, but it's actually coming home into people's apartments and homes, and in ways that are not always seen. So there's an edge of arousal, that there's, arousal is up more than it would normally be.
Yes, and if I can interrupt, I think one of the things about that is that none of us are used to this level of uncertainty. None of us have experienced anything like it before. So it's not like we have a kind of a ready resource to bring to bear. It's not like we've got things that we've done before at similar times, because there hasn't really been anything similar.
No.
Nothing quite like this.
Yes, it's, well, apart from people who have lived in war zones, escaped war zones, or so it's important to recognize those experiences. My mother was evacuated. Both my parents are Londoners, and my mother was evacuated during World War II, and my father was in the British Army for 6 years. He drove the heavy ammunition trucks to the front line. And I think as a daughter of that generation, although I was born in 1950, and I don't pretend to know what that was like, I've got some sense of it through their experience and how it impacted them and their view of the world, and how they understood their position in the world, if I could say that. So that's something, I think, that's helpful in my experience. And in the work we do, we're always looking for people's resources, where they've been tested. You may have experienced death in the family previously, or divorce, or you have had financial crisis, and you've managed. You come through somehow, so you can rely on that now. But equally, I work with people who have not been tested in these ways, and this situation is presenting them with challenges, as you say, that they have no, if you like, template for. And this is where sometimes the stresses and strains get out of hand, and the response to the stresses and strains become unhelpful.
And would you say, Arlene, that what would you be saying to couples who got into a position where they started to feel that they were getting into unhelpful patterns of responses to those stresses and strains?
I'd want to say a lot, actually. But interestingly, my colleagues who work independently and in the social care and healthcare professions are saying that they are receiving more referrals. So that tells me that people are aware that it's helpful to have assistance from other people.
Sure.
I think one of the great difficulties is when you believe that you have to go it alone. When your understanding of independence is not my understanding of independence. My understanding of independence is when you can turn to somebody else, somebody who will respond, be interested, who will listen. Now, some couples live in isolation, some people live in isolation. But I think the first thing I would say is, if you're aware that a situation is becoming fraught and potentially dangerous, and by that I mean, when does unhelpful arousal become dangerous arousal? When do you get overwhelmed? When do you become reactive in fight, flight? And particularly if you're using alcohol to make you feel better, it probably makes it more likely that you will lash out. You might say something, do something that you regret afterwards. So the really important thing is to be able to observe, it's almost like helicopter yourself and what's going on. And in order to do that, we have to stay sufficiently calm in order to do that. So, the ability to comfort yourself and soothe yourself is really important. Some people have never been shown how to do that, or it's not been done for them, so they're having to learn it. Paying attention to your body, learning about your body, learning how your brain works. I work with quite a few people who don't understand how tension builds in the body, who don't realize that if their breathing becomes short, sharp, and shallow, or they're breathing through their mouth, say, that their brain thinks they're in fight flight, and the arousal comes up dangerously high. Deep breathing, abdominal breathing is wonderful. By that I mean that kind of breathing where you breathe in for 5 and breathe out for 5. So people say to me, well, that's a bit airy-fairy, but actually it's not, because it stimulates the vagus nerve, as you know, and the vagus nerve is responsible for putting that brake on arousal. So deep breathing is hugely helpful. Faith, spirituality, using faith and taking advice from your scriptures is very important. And time out, taking yourself off to quietly recover somewhere, using some form of activity to recover. The other thing that people don't understand is that if you get unhelpfully aroused and you go into fight flight, you do release adrenaline and the stress hormones. And if you don't metabolize them by doing a runner, as it were, and if for some reason you can't get out to run, you have to do something to metabolize that. And you probably need to take yourself off quietly somewhere. Even just sitting in a chair and running with your legs on the spot fools your brain into thinking that you're running. Simple things like that you can do. But if you are going to take yourself off for quiet recovery time, then everybody needs to know you're doing it, and everybody needs to agree to it. Because I meet couples where if one is going, I need to take myself off, this is getting dangerous, the other one's like, is afraid that if they go, they won't come back. And it's often fear that they won't come back, that somebody will block the door and say, we need to sort this out. And in that moment, you're not paying attention to your own safety, or you're worried that a partner is using time out to escape difficult conversations or issues that need to be resolved. But actually, if somebody's getting flooded physiologically, the only thing you can do is take yourself off and calm down. So developing strategies for calming yourself down are crucial life skills.
So that needs to be negotiated, doesn't it? It's like if I walk out of this conversation now, you won't know what it means.
Exactly.
But if we talked about beforehand how, Arlene, it's possible that I might get I might get aroused unhelpfully, or I might get into a state in which case I might need to take myself off for a while, and you shouldn't worry.
Yeah, exactly.
Then we're going to be okay.
Absolutely. That's brilliant, Philip. Absolutely brilliant. It doesn't work every time, but it starts that process of working. And the other side of it, is if we do something that we regret, or say something that we regret when we're upset or annoyed or hurt, there has to be a process of repair, and apology takes time. I hear people say, oh, well, you're always apologizing and nothing ever changes, or some people never apologize. But it's kind of understanding that apologizing is acknowledging what happened, having your experience acknowledged and acknowledging what happened for the other, standing in their shoes. And you can't often do that in one conversation. Sometimes needs to be a process of understanding and commitment, because the one thing that stops violence in its tracks is empathy and being able to think through the consequences of your actions. So in that awful moment when all you want to do is hit somebody, it's the fact that you can immediately see the look on their face that stays your hand. You don't do it. It's empathy and thinking through the consequences of your actions. But of course, that means you need to be online here that you haven't gone offline. So that means you have to monitor your arousal levels, how your breathing changes, your heart rate changes, the tension in your muscles changes. You know, when I trained years ago as a clinical psychologist, Philip, behavior therapy was very popular. And this was before it got incorporated into the cognitive behavior therapy movement. And one of the things we were taught was progressive muscle relaxation. And it's kind of fallen out of the repertoire, I think, over the years. And I've recently been working with a young woman who's 18, who needs to check things a lot. And this is worse for her at bedtime when she's trying to get to sleep. And I was talking to her about progressive muscle relaxation. And being a young techie person, she goes online, she finds an app. Apparently now, there's an app for progressive.
There's an app for everything.
You know, I just thought it was brilliant. I know there's lots of mindfulness apps, but mindfulness doesn't work for everyone. Whereas with some, you know, because if you think that some of us work better with action, some of us work better with thinking, and some of us work better with feeling. Well, for those of us who work better with action, doing exercise to release the, you know, the stress hormones, the metabolism of it, and those of us who have trouble sleeping, you know, a physical activity like progressive muscle relaxation helps us go into sleep. It's horses for courses, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And having the freedom to experiment. But I think importantly, having somebody to talk to about it, so you're not doing it on your own. It's fundamental.
And in terms of having somebody to talk about it with, Arlene, there is, I mean, I guess there are people like us. There are therapists who are still working and available during time of lockdown. There are agencies that people can telephone in emergencies, aren't there? Like the Samaritans are there all the time. There are also, I'm thinking, a lot of families will have other resources who are more local to them, people they're connected with, maybe somebody from the extended family, maybe somebody from the community who they know, who they can reach out to and talk to about these things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is the time actually when we really need to be doing that. And, you know, and I think most people do reach out to others, but there's a small minority who've learned that you can't trust people. It's not safe to trust people. And this is a time actually to challenge that and to think about what would support you in challenging that. So it's a time to dig deep into memory and to think, was there someone, you know, was there a teacher? Was there an aunt or an uncle? Was there a neighbor who took an interest in you? You know, someone who saw you, and to take that risk to reach out now. I'm very proud to say that someone that I know that I've been working with her family, her name is Sonia. She was interviewed by ITN News recently and appeared on their news bulletin a few days ago. She is somebody who has struggled with depression all of her adult life, and she lives on her own. And she thought that she would be okay during this lockdown period because she's used to living on her own. But she's realized, she knew this cognitively, but she now knows it in a felt way, that actually going out to work and having coffee with a friend was so important and what kept her going. So any way we can find to stay connected to others, and not all of us have access to online resources, I know, but we've always been able to go out for a walk or to pop into the shop to get a few things. And got to be careful what I say because people keep themselves safe in different ways. But social connection and a sense of belonging is so important.
And also as part of that is mitigating shame, because of course part of what stops us, I think, from approaching others with difficulties like this is a sense of shame that we should be able to manage, or that we've got out of control in some kind of way, and that that's not okay, and that we can't be open about that. So we have to, I think we have to get over that sense of shame in order to be open with people.
Yes.
And we have to choose well who we're going to be open to.
Yes, and I think at the heart of that, Philip, is recognizing we're all in the same boat. You know, we're all people. We all struggle with the same feelings and the same dilemmas, and some of us have experienced more adversity than others. You know, I want to acknowledge that, but we are all in the same boat. You know, we have the same needs for connection and for comfort and for reassurance. And I think if we do feel that somehow we've let ourselves down, or we've let others down, or we're not entitled to other people's interest or help, actually that does need challenging. And this is a perfect opportunity to do it, I think, because our worlds have turned upside down. And one of the really interesting things about turning a world upside down is it turns all your assumptions upside down. And that can be helpful. You know, we can use it productively, I think.
Yes, being in fresh territory and being in a place which enables us to that we've never been before, allows us to do some new things, and some new things are going to be positive. Some new things are going to be talking with people in a new way, in a way that connects us with people, in a way that makes us feel more deeply understood.
Yeah. No, I agree. Well said.
Well, perhaps we should finish it there, Arlene. I want to thank you again for joining me in this conversation, and I hope people will find it helpful. And,
me too.
And I wish you well throughout the rest of this lockdown.
And to you too, Philip, and to everybody who's watching this. Thank you.